Your bank just asks you to prove your source of wealth. And this might feel like an accusation now, but it's actually a very standard process at regulated banks out there. The uncomfortable part though is that in my experience, often applicants actually get rejected even though they have legitimate source of funds because they're not prepared well. Even a clean tax return or a valid bank statement cannot be enough on its own sometimes. So in the next few minutes, I'll actually explain you what the bank really is checking for and how you can give them the proof that they can actually verify. So when a bank asks you for source of wealth, they typically want to understand where the money is coming from in simple terms. So they want to understand all your earnings from earlier years and obviously how are you currently doing in order to understand that the money that you want to deposit into the bank, where it originates from and how you've earned it and if you've declared it everywhere properly. And the story about that obviously depends on you, right? It can be that you've had a profitable business for a few years. It can be that you sold a house, that you received dividends from an investment that you make, or you just had a larger investment return on it. All of these things are valid, but you need to be very clear on how that money actually originated, and you need to be able to prove it as well. And then there is a second term, being source of funds, which sounds very similar, but it's a bit different, and you need to understand the difference when the bank asks you, because the source of funds is actually specifically about the funds that you're about to put or receive in the bank account. So when it's about source of wealth, and that's typically in private banking relationships, but not only, they really want to understand how did you accumulate the money that you call yours in general. And when it's about source of funds, they really want to understand, okay, this specific transaction or this specific money that you want to deposit with us, where does it come from? And that's typically more in business banking. When you're depositing a larger amount, they want to maybe understand that this is an investment that an investor gave you in order to build the business, or they want to understand that this has been earned via invoices, you can prove that, and so on and so forth. But those two terms are very different, and you need to know that when answering them. So what we already understand from this distinction is that source of wealth is a lot more of a broader and wider question when their bank asks you, because it's not just about a specific amount of money that you're trying to move into the account, and they really want to understand how your wealth was put together. And that's where typically a tax return or a bank statement is not enough, right? Because a tax return, they might prove a certain period, 1 year. A bank statement, they might prove a certain transaction that has happened, but they really want to dig and they really want to understand, okay, so how did you build that wealth that you have? And typically when you're wealthier and often older, that comes together, it's a bit more of a complex question because you've been doing business for many years, you've maybe had real estate or other investments that you sold, and really need to look at, okay, how do we put this together and document this properly, your story, rather than the source of funds where it's just like, okay, well, I'm getting this transaction, here's the bank statement for it, or here's the tax return for it, whatever. So that's really important to understand that source of wealth, you really need to think that through because it's a bigger type of question. So when you ask yourself, so why is that necessary? Why does the bank want to know all of that? That is private information. The answer is, as usually, the regulator, because banks are regulated financial institutions, and that is just part of the requirements nowadays, that they need to understand where their clients' funds actually originate from. That's because a bank is regulated by a financial supervisor, and typically if the bank does something wrong or they don't actually follow those rules, they're being fined, or they can even get closed if they're not big enough. Typically it's fines, but depends. And that is typically a problem for the bank. So that's why they really want to understand, especially for higher risk individuals or high risk businesses, where do these funds come from? And they need to put the time and effort into understanding it, which means that you will have to put the time and effort into explaining it. I know it's annoying, there's no way around it. So what we typically do is we work with our clients on preparing that and giving you the highest likelihood of success, because we're obviously not the bank, rather than you actually complaining and saying, I don't want to do this, and taking it personal, right? Because that really doesn't help. It has to happen, and it will happen. So super simple advice. I know that might sound stupid to some people, but seriously, don't take it personal. Don't panic. Don't get angry. A lot of people, they take it as an insult. They're saying, hey, why do you want to check my source of wealth? Who do you think you are, looking into my history, my financial private history? I've done nothing wrong. That is seriously not the right approach. You're absolutely right. And if you have a clean background, the bank will understand that and they will pursue. It's just that you need to really take this as a neutral thing that's happening now. You need to just prepare, you need to collect your documents, and you have a good attitude, and then everything will just be fine as long as you have done nothing wrong, obviously. Another reason for that is that in the end of the day, you're dealing with humans. I know less and less so nowadays, but you're still dealing with humans. And obviously they cannot make something that isn't true. So if you don't have the certain proof, so if you've done something wrong, they obviously can't help you at the bank. However, if you're just in a calm way trying to explain it, and sometimes you might miss a document, they might remind you, you then get it. So typically, if you treat that person very well on the other side, they are more willing to come towards you and actually help you with that. And therefore, we always say, don't take it personal, don't get that attitude on, because obviously if you're having that very angry or panic attitude on, they're also less likely to, have the patience to support you with that. So what are the different level of difficulties when proving your source of wealth? And from my experience for doing this for many years, typically the two most important variables are the origin. So is it originated in one place only, or is it internationally? And the amount that we're talking about. And obviously with the origin being a bit more scattered and more internationally earned, plus if it's a high number, that typically makes it a harder case rather than a domestic case with a smaller amount, which also is kind of obvious, but those are the key variables that we look at, and that will tell us how difficult this check will actually be for you. Typically, most people who watch this channel, at least from my experience, you're typically more in an international tier, right? Because you're obviously interested in international banking and international business. So likely you have earned your money across different countries and continents. You might have a company in Dubai, you might have a company in Hong Kong, you might hold stake in another company in a third jurisdiction, you might have international investments like crypto, right? And that's where the case becomes a lot harder versus, let's say, someone in Germany or in the UK or in the Netherlands who's worked all his life for an employer and now he can prove all of that. That's typically the easier cases. Those go very quickly, they're very straightforward, while the international ones are a bit more harder. And that's why typically when clients come to us, they're often interested in those international type of things, and that's where we can add the most value. So if you're out there operating internationally, either by doing international investments, having international companies, by moving yourself a lot, that's when you typically want to come to us. We can really help you prepare well for that case. Obviously, we can't change the outcome. The decision sits with the bank, and that's obviously how regulation works, but we can help you prepare by finding the right banking provider, by preparing your application properly, and giving it the highest likelihood of success by not just getting a no by your own wrongdoing. The second variable, the amount, works kind of the same way. Obviously, it's a lot harder to prove a large amount of money because typically you haven't earned a larger amount of money at once, right? If you want to move 50K into an account, you can say, well, that's what I've earned the last 2 years and saved, right? So that's very straightforward. If it's about millions, it's often a lot more complex and scattered. So maybe you're not someone more international, but you're a high net worth individual or you're a successful business owner. That's when it can make sense to also come to us and really prepare for those private banking relationships, because it's a two-sided sword. Obviously, if you have more money, you have more access to private banking, you have very good banks that are willing to work with you. But trust me, the Swiss banks, the Singapore banks, if you're a high net worth individual, yes, they want you, but don't expect light touch. It's going to be a hard enhanced due diligence and all those years that you've built that wealth. And that's why clients often come to us, because they really want that support, because those banks, they check even harder. Okay, so now we've been talking a lot about, well, we want to prepare properly, but what is actually a good case? So how can you have a well-prepared source of wealth documentation? So a good source of wealth proof is when everything just lines up, right? So you want to be able to explain in very simple terms how that money was generated. You're able to back that up by the right documentation. So if you had a business, you want to be probably showing tax returns of that business. You want to be showing invoices of example customers and so on and so forth, a website. If it's maybe from an investment, and again, this is not or, this can be and or, you want to be showing when you've bought it, when you've sold it, how much, where you've declared it. And typically once you have a coherent story and you can back it up, you also want to be showing how that money moved into that account. So where did it originate? Then it was moved into account A. From there, it was sent to account B. And that's why it's sitting in the account it's sitting in right now, or it's sitting in that asset it is sitting in right now. And by having all of this coherent explained, that's when typically the risk teams at the bank say, okay, that works for us. But when your story becomes a bit more unclear and you have different answers for the same question and you can't really back it up, that's where the problems start to originate. And there is no perfect, there's no right or wrong. As in usual, it depends on your specific situation. I can't explain to you how you should do it for your situation without knowing your case, because everyone's different, everyone's built their wealth differently. But generally speaking, if you follow those steps and you are not emotional, you're not angry, you have a clear explanation of where the money comes from, you're not kind of moving between stories, you're having all the documents clean to back it up, that's what I'd call a good case, and that's where we typically want to be starting when we approach the bank. And the other side, if you don't have that, if you're actually doing those points, that's where you decrease your chances of acceptance a lot. But I can tell you from my experience, also honest applications can be declined. Sometimes we have clients, they say, hey, I've literally done everything by the book. Why does it not work? And there can be typical reasons why an honest and even though well-prepared case might actually not go ahead. The first one is that the story doesn't really add up, right? So you might have an explanation, but the documents don't really support that, or you're claiming something that you then can't really back up, or you're changing your story. That's typical reason number one why it doesn't work, and the bank just says, hey, we can't really verify it. It doesn't really make sense what you're trying to explain here. So definitely have a good story aligned with the reality, and that's typically where, you know, the problems go away, because you can just orient on the reality. The second problem is vagueness, and really that kills it in a source of wealth discussion, is when you're never really pinning down specific events, specific numbers, specific cases when something has happened, and you're always answering very vague. Oh, I had a coaching business. What have you done with the coaching business? I've been coaching very broadly business related topics. Oh yeah, so who did you deal with? Oh, I was dealing with all types of clients. Okay, so when did you actually make a profit? Oh, well, I was running that business for many years, and you know, over those years there was always a steady flow of customers. So that's exactly what you don't want to be doing, right? You want to be very concrete. I had a coaching business. I helped those and those companies. These are example customers. Here are the invoices. That's when they've paid me. You kind of get the idea, but vagueness really kills it. Don't try to be vague here. And the last one is obviously being disorganized and not having the right things in place. And that's unfortunately the one that we see the most. A lot of people, they have actually a very legitimate source of wealth. They maybe had a good business, or they sold an investment, but they simply don't have the paper trail. And I know this might not help you if it's too late, but generally speaking, you always want to document everything. Generally in life, that helps you with a lot of things, but especially in banking. If you sell a house or a large investment, document that. Keep the documents of that. If you're running a business that generates a lot of money, get those audited financial statements in, save them somewhere. Really, that's the last and most important reason, is that people, they've just not documented it well. They were traveling, they were running businesses back in a time where these regulations were a lot softer, and now when the regulation has changed, you need to be proving those things. They don't have it in place anymore. So try to recreate what you can recreate, and then going forward, just be organized. I know it's very general advice, but it'll help you generally and especially in banking. So if you watch this video and you know that you're a harder case, that's when I really urge you to come to us at Redomiciled and work with us, because either you're a high risk business and you're not finding the right bank accounts, or you're a high net worth individual and you want to be onboarding to a specific bank and they start asking you these questions, or you don't know what private bank you want and you want to have some good private banking relationships in Switzerland, in Singapore, or wherever. I urge you, come to us. We're a banking advisory and consultancy firm out of Hong Kong. We've been doing this for many years. We work with over 170 partner banks. We have our own financial infrastructure. All of our team have worked many years in banking. And those are exactly these type of cases that we can support. We can help you find the right banks. We can help you prepare an application. We can increase your chances. Of course, we can't change the outcome completely. In the end, it sits with the bank. It is your responsibility to have done the things properly in the past. But if those things in place, we can help you establish good banking relationships around the world. And as usual, you can find the link in the description, reach out to us, meet the team. Or if that's not for you and you just enjoy watching these videos, I'm obviously happy to see you in the next one.